Hello and welcome to the in-depth series section of Drishti IAS. I am Aisha Singh, and in today's video we will be discussing about what is greedflation. So this is a new term which has recently been discussed in news, and we all know that how important the terms which remains in news is in UPSC, especially in the prelims section. So let us first look at the timeline. First we will be looking at the news, then what is inflation, wage price spiral, what are the reasons why inflation goes up, what are the factors for inflation, then what is greedflation, what is the Indian scenario in terms of greedflation and also in the developed countries. In the end, a prelims MCQ. This topic is of relevance from General Studies paper 3, that is economics. So we all know the love of UPSC for the new terminologies, and we have always seen that especially when something is related to the topic of monetary policy or inflation, that is very much becomes important from the exam perspective. So first of all, this news has been taken from the Indian Express, and the news reads, explain speaking section, that is what is greedflation, does India also have it? The word also says that whether India has it or not, then something else also has it. So that means the developed countries is having this problem of greedflation. So greedflation is, if you will break the word greedflation, so that is greed plus inflation. So that means inflation, that means rising of the prices. So rising of the prices because of someone's greed. So greed is leading to the rising of the prices. So if we will merge both these terms, then it will lead to greedflation. So let us see that what has happened is that, first of all, let's discuss few of the terms of economy. We will be doing something very basic, and we'll be talking in a layman's term that what do you mean by inflation, deflation, greedflation and everything. So first of all, let us know that what is inflation. So whenever we talk about inflation, there is one term we always hear in news, and the people when they talk to each other in very basic and very layman's term, and that is the prices are rising. This is what we always hear from people. If we will say in inverted commas that the prices are on a rise, that the vegetables are becoming expensive, the oil is becoming expensive, the pulses are becoming expensive, overall the prices are rising in the market. So if in very basic terms we will say, then the rising of prices is what is inflation, or the inflation rate is the rate at which the general price level rises. So for very normal people or for basic citizens of India, for like you and me, if the prices are rising, for us it is inflation. So in India, there are two parameters by which we measure inflation, and that is CPI and WPI, that is Consumer Price Index and Wholesale Price Index. And on individual level, we take the Consumer Price Index for measuring the inflation. And the Central Bank of India, that is the Reserve Bank of India, has kept the inflation bracket, that is 4 plus minus 2%. So it means from 2% to 6% is the range of inflation under which inflation should be managed. Then there is one more term called deflation. Deflation. So if we will say that in normal terms inflation is rising of prices, then what is exact opposite of inflation is what is called deflation. So if inflation is rising of prices, then deflation is exact opposite of inflation, that means decreasing of prices. Inflation is price level rising, deflation is price level declining. So what is exactly opposite of inflation is deflation. Then in between inflation and deflation, there is one more term called disinflation. So what is disinflation? Okay, see, if the prices are rising, it is inflation. If the prices are decreasing, this is deflation. Then the rate at which the prices are decreasing, like for example, the month which is going on is June. Like for example, the inflation range in June is 10%. Then earlier month May it was 8%. Then April it was 6%. Then March it was 5%. So it means that after every single month, at a gap of every single month, the rate of rising of prices or the rate at which the prices are decreasing are changing. That means the temporary change in the temporary change while reaching towards the deflation is what is called disinflation. So disinflation is temporary while deflation is permanent. See, deflation is something which has happened while disinflation is something which is happening in the present scenario. So inflation is rising of prices, deflation is decreasing of prices, and disinflation is a temporary situation in the market, which means that the prices are on a decline. Now let's talk about one more term, and that is reflation. So reflation typically follows disinflation, because in the term reflation means it means doing something again. So in this, what the policymakers do is they try to pump up economic activity. For example, if deflation has reached, deflation means decreasing of prices, then if a situation of deflation has reached, then the policymakers will try to pump up the economy. So by trying to pump up the economy, they will be following the process of reflation. And this pumping up of the economy can be done either by government spending more or interest rates being reduced. So they will do something so that the economy gets pumped up again. So we heard what is inflation, that is the rising of prices. Then deflation, exact opposite of inflation, that is declining of prices. Then disinflation, that is trend when the inflation rate decelerates. It means when the inflation rate is becoming slow. It means the prices are not rising slowly and steadily in a temporary manner, the prices are coming down. Then there is one more term called reflation. That means again the policymakers will think of pumping up the economic activity. Now let's talk about what causes inflation. So there are two very basic cause of inflation, that is the cost push inflation and the demand pull inflation. As the name itself suggests, we will be able to think that what does this mean. So the cost push inflation means prices get pushed up because input costs have risen. Input costs have risen, like for example, if we go and buy something in the market and a year back it was costing us rupees 400, then again in this year, like for 2023, we go again and buy the same thing. Like for example, the cost which was earlier 400 now becomes 600. So we tend to think that why the material or the good has become so expensive. Then many a times it would be possible that the raw material of the goods is becoming costlier. So the cost push, the input cost of the good is what is creating the price rise or inflation. Then demand pull inflation is cost is pulled up because there is excess demand. For example, we'll take a very basic example, like for example, there is a toothpaste, that is Colgate, is in the market. So for example, the demand is very high, while on the other hand the supply is not that much. So if the demand would be very high and supply is not that much, it means there are more people who want the good, but there are less goods in the market. So the demand would rise. So that is what is the demand pull inflation. When the demand is high but the supply is low, and cost is push inflation is when the input cost of the good or product rises. Then how is inflation solved? In very basic terms, then that is inflation is because of excess demand. Then central bank rise interest rates to bring overall demand in line with overall supply. It means the increase of interest rate. So if the interest rate would increase, then what will happen? If the interest, like for example, if someone is trying to buy something or has already bought something on EMIs, so if the interest rate would become high, then the EMIs would become expensive. Then people would not go for taking loans. then things will become expensive from the perspective of banks. It means the people have to pay more from their pockets. So, if inflation has to be controlled, then interest rates is what the government does, interest rate hike. Then inflation is due to cost pressures also, then even then the central bank raises interest rates. Because if the interest rate, see, what is inflation if I will talk about? Inflation is rising of prices. If prices are rising and people are, so what do we need to do to lower down the prices? If people in the market are not going to buy the stuff or the goods, then prices will automatically in a period of time would come down because there are no buyers of the things. Then if people are not earning enough to buy the things, then what would they do? They would go and take loan somewhere. But if the interest rates are very high, will the people be able to take loans? No, they will not. Then this is what the government do in their capacity, what they can do, because the government or the central bank cannot do every single thing which is possible. So what is in their capacity is what they do, and first and foremost thing is the increase of the interest rates so that there is less money in the economy. The inflow of money in the economy from the government sides become less. Then the idea is to prevent something called the wage price spiral. This is also a problem which with inflation comes, that is the wage price spiral. So we will be looking into this. What is wage price spiral is, what happens is, so if there is a good or a commodity in the market whose prices are going up. So if the prices or the inflation is constantly at a very high place in the market, then what will happen? The workers who are working in an organization will also be asking for a good wage hike or the good price hike. So first of all, the prices of the goods in the market are high. Then the people working in the organization are also demanding a higher wages or a higher increment. Then if wages go up, it only fuels the overall demand. So for example, if the workers who are working in an organization will get a good raise or good price hike, then what will happen? Their income will increase. Then if their income will increase, then they will have the same capacity to spend money in the market. And if the same capacity of the people would be there to spend in the market, then will the inflation be able to come down? No, because if the price hike has taken place, then on the other hand, the money in the people's pocket are also there so that they can spend, because the money in the people's pocket have also increased. So this will, what will this do? This will add on to the inflation. Because what is inflation? Inflation is the excess amount in the economy. The price rise. It means there is too much money flow in the economy. So to control the inflation, we need to control the money which is going on in the economy. So if the money which is going on in the economy needs to be controlled, then we need to have a check on people's pocket. But on the other hand, if the people who are earning good is earning even more, then they will have the capacity to spend also in the market, and which will add on or which will fuel the inflation which is currently going on in the economy. So if the wages go up, it will only fuel the overall demand in the market and doing nothing to boost the supply, because people whose wages are also increasing with inflation, they will keep on buying things while the supply is not there. So what will this do? This will add on to the inflation. Then the end result would be inflation surges further, because the supply won't be there and the demand would be there. Now let's talk about the topic, that is greedflation. This was the terms which you needed to understand before moving on to the main topic, and that is the greedflation. So greedflation is someone's greed which is adding on to the inflation. So whose greed is adding on to the inflation? So it is the corporate sector's greed which is adding on to the inflation. And how the corporate sector is adding on to the inflation is what we will be looking today. So what is greedflation? As the name itself suggests, and I have already told you that it means corporate greed is fueling inflation. the corporate greed, that the corporates are earning more and more profits, and the profits which are earned by the corporates is what is leading on to the inflation. Then instead of the wage price spiral, it is the profit price spiral that is in the play. Profit price spiral. Whose profit are we talking about here? It is the profit which is earned by the corporate sector. So the profit which is earned by the corporate sector is leading to the inflation, and the companies have exploited the inflation that people were experiencing. So what is happening is, if there is inflation in the market, but on the other hand, the corporate sectors, the huge big corporates of the world or globally, what they see it as an opportunity to earn even more. So when inflation is already there, they many a times what they do is, seeing the demand in the market, if there is fine demand in the market of certain products, then they with inflation also increase the price of the products, and they add on to the inflation and try to earn very high profits, and this high profits is what is even leading to the inflation, and this is what is leading to the inflation in the developed countries at present, for example the US or the European countries, and they are suffering from it. And what is being said is that India is also becoming a part of greedflation of the big corporate sectors. Then the companies exploit the inflation when people were experiencing inflation by putting up their prices way beyond just covering their increased cost. So what happens is, what the corporates do, they say that they need an input cost. So the input cost or the raw material cost for them is rising. So they need to rise the cost of the product. But instead of matching the cost of the product with the normal basic thing, they tend to increase the cost multiple times, and the price becomes very high. So when the price becomes very high and the product has a relevance in the market and the customer needs to buy that product, then this adds on to the inflation, because the profits in the increased and the inflated prices which the corporates does is very high profits which they earn, and then used that to maximize their profit margins, and in turn further fuel inflation. Now look at this chart. This chart talks about the US market and the profit margins which the corporates have made over last many years, or I would say over the last 100 years. So this is the profit percentage on the vertical side, and this is the years. So if you will see, starting from the year 1930, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and this is 2020. So if you will see, then the profit margins are increasing with time. And if you will see that during the time of COVID pandemic and afterwards, the profit margins of the corporates have risen to very high level, the supernatural profits they are having at present. So this is about the US market, that the corporates have made very high profits in the last 3 to 4 years. Then look at this chart also. This tells us about the normal and recent contributions to growth in unit prices in the non-financial corporate sector. Then the dark blue line is the year 2020-2021, and the light blue line is the average of the years from 1979 to 2019. It means the light blue line is talking about the previous few decades, and the dark blue lines is talking about the recent decades. Now let's look at the corporate profits. So if we will look at the corporate profits, then the earlier times or till the time of 2019 it was 11.4, but look at this line. Look at the time of 2020-2021, the corporate profits have risen to 53.9%. The gap is huge. And this is where the greedflation concept comes into being, that it is the corporate sector's profit margins which are leading on to the inflation. Then non-labor input cost, if we will see, that has also increased, but the margin is not much, and unit labor cost has now decreased. So earlier the unit labor cost was much, but now it has decreased, but now the profit margins have increased of corporates, and earlier it was very less. So the profit margin is what is making the news headlines, that it is the corporate greed which is adding on to the inflation. Now let's talk about the Indian scenario. This chart tells us about the Indian scenario, and this is from the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, and the chart tells us this is the profit margin and this is the year from 2011 to 2023. So last 3 years is the COVID years. So even if we will see in the Indian scenario, the profit margins as compared to the earlier times in the last 3 years have risen to new heights. It means in India also, as the chart is very much depicting, that in India in the last 3 years, or you can say the COVID period, the COVID pandemic period, and afterwards, the profits made by the corporates are very, very, very high. And the chart is perfectly depicting it, that from 2020 to 2023, the corporate sector of India has made very high profits. Then the net profits in India of 4,293 listed companies reached 2.9 trillion in 2023 quarter March. And this is over 3.5 times the average quarterly profit earned by listed companies before 2020, that is before pandemic. It means after pandemic, the profit margins of corporate sector has increased, and Indian corporate sector has generated superlative profits in the post-pandemic period. Then 60% of the growth in net profit can be attributed entirely to the increase in profit margin, around 60%. And these are the facts and the figures and the data which is given by a very authentic source, and this has been given by the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. So this tells us that it is not only the developed countries which are suffering from the problem of greedflation, it is also India. Now in the end, a prelims MCQ, and you people need to tell me the answer in the comment section, and that is what best defines or describes the term greedflation. A corporate greed is declining inflation, a climate change phenomena, corporate greed is fueling inflation, or none of the above. I think we have had a very nice session, so you will be able to solve this one and try to give me the answer in the comment section. And that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Till we meet next time, keep reading and keep writing.